Welcome back. We are in module 6 and so far in module 6 we have discussed about language shift and various reasons of language contact and that results in language shift, and we have also in the last lecture we have also discussed a little bit about language death. Because language death is one of the possible final outcomes of the gradual shift in language loyalty. So, once another language becomes powerful, more powerful than the first language, and eventually speakers have the possibility of shifting their loyalty from language 1 to language 2. They might just stop speaking the language 1. That is a natural, very natural outcome of language contact. So, but there we did not discuss it in detail. I mentioned it as a part of language shift. So, today we will discuss a little bit more about language death, because language death does not only happen as a result of bilingualism, there are many other reasons. So, broadly we will try to cover these 4 areas. So, language death and repercussions, death and cultural cognition, language revitalization, and some case studies. So, we have discussed about language shift leading to death, but that is not the only case where language death may happen or does happen. So, this is the first one. So, this is a gradual death, that is when over a period of time, it takes a lot of time, maybe few generations. So, once a language has been rendered less powerful, minority status, it does not have the opportunities, it does not have the jobs, education is not does not use this language as a medium. Over a period of time, the chances are high that the other language that has replaced this might replace it completely, but that is a gradual case. However, there are other possibilities as well. So, they can be called sudden death, radical death, and bottom to top death. There are many ways, many interesting ways they have been talked about, but primarily let us understand that language death might be sudden, it might be gradual. So, both are equally possible. So, sudden is when rapid extinction of language without any intervening period of bilingualism. This typically happened as a result of war, conquest, colonialism has been one of the most important reasons for wiping out languages and communities overnight. So, this is the case where sudden death is a reality. One example we have given here is Tasmanian. The last speaker was a monolingual. So, there was no bilingualism, no intervening period of shifting from one language to another. It was sudden, language died suddenly. Radical death is defined as when people stop speaking the language due to political repression, out of self defense. The last speaker does not transmit the language to children. That is when radical death can happen. This has been seen in case of Spanish Inquisition in many countries, where overnight people had to stop speaking the language for the sake of their own dear life. So, in such cases obviously there is no transmission of the language, then the language dies. Bottom to top death, language no longer used for conversation, but survive in religion or folk songs. For example, many of the Tzeltal languages they are used in prayers, but they are not used much in the day to day life. So, there are all kinds of possibilities. Now, this is directly linked to the political social reality of a place, of people, and so on. So, that is why we have different kinds. So, the most common ones that we have seen are the gradual death and of course, sudden death throughout colonial period. Now, there are many of course, textbooks will tell you all the different types. So, we have included some of them. There are various other kinds that have been talked about. We will not discuss the death through shift, because that is something we have already discussed in the previous lecture. Some others we have added here. So, for example, rememberer's death. A rememberer is a person who passively remembers fragments of the language. So, the fragments of a language survive long after the death of the last speaker. Some people might remember some fragments, over a period of time, some long lost songs or folk tales or something, some fragments. When that also is gone, when the last rememberer also passes away, the language is considered dead. This is kind of a less prevalent, let us say, it is also, you can call it a rare kind, but this is also a kind. Second language speakers death, it may refer to the second language speakers in the narrow sense or to another group language speakers. So, language becomes extinct when its last second language speaker passes away. Whoever was using it as a second language also passes away, then also language death might happen. Researchers, this is yet another interesting take. A given language is alive when a relevant researcher is alive. Many researchers across the world have been working tirelessly on documenting near extinct languages or dead languages, trying to revive them and so on. So, as long as the researcher is around, even the language is probably on the verge of death, but the researcher is still around, the language is also alive in some sense. But the researcher is someone who this researcher we are talking about only those who work on endangered languages, for example. So, and who have a varying degree of command of the language, because researchers by virtue of being an expert on the language, they do have a command. So, once the researcher is gone, language is also dead. So, records of language like books, tapes and CDs, this is a modern day phenomenon. So, a language is alive as long as it has record, some kind of record is preserved. In fact, that is the reason a lot of documentation efforts in endangered language research actually goes into this, to create primers, books, tapes, audio, video, CDs and so on, to keep things alive as long as possible. So, this kind of records include also dictionaries, grammars, texts as well as audio, video recorded materials. In fact, some rituals, day to day activities, all kinds of things have been recorded for the sake of posterity. Then the substratum, that is vocabulary. It is possible to say that a language is still alive as long as it survives in place names. This is also an interesting way of looking at language death. For example, Ainu origin place names in northern part of Japan. African pygmies retain a trace in botanic terminology, and Aboriginal languages trace in place names in eastern Australia. So, in many of these places the long gone languages are still, fragments of it still remain in terms of place names and botanical terminology and so on and so forth. So, these are also some types. Now, the consequences of language death, this is something important, because it is because of the consequences of language death that we are dedicating so much of time and energy and effort. Researchers around the world are trying to work on endangered language. Then why are we doing this? The reason is the consequences of language death are not non-serious. It is not a small thing when a language dies. What happens when a language dies? Of course, there are books and books written on this. So, what I have done here is just added some prominent findings and some prominent few of the most important pointers, but one of the best books to read in this regard is of course David Crystal. You can read the detailed studies of various languages that are endangered or dead. So, one of course primary importance is of course that of cultural heritage. So, once a language is no more, what we lose is a storehouse of information that that encodes about the cultural heritage of that group. So, it is about the not only the text, not only the stories, but also the community's values, practices, their history, and the stories of course are there. So many things will also vanish with the language, and languages that are not written has a more serious consequence when they die. So, a language, so I quote, a language is a repository of all its speakers' collective history and thereby cultural heritage. As Boswell famously quotes Dr. Johnson as saying, languages are the pedigree of nation, pedigree in the sense of the cultural repository. Languages maintain the cultural repository of communities, of practices, of their history, collective history and their collective cognition as well. So, as a result of which languages are important in order to maintain the cultural heritage of a group. Similarly, once language dies, it's a connected idea, that of identity. So far we have seen in many other lectures as well how language is an integral part of our identity. So, once a language is gone, a very important aspect of our identity is also gone. So, this is a well known Welsh proverb that says that language is a nation without a heart. A nation without a language is a nation without a heart. So, when you have lost your language, you have lost your heart basically. So, that is the identity, the very soul of a group, a community. Decline in linguistic diversity, diminished richness and diversity in the global hegemony of languages. So, once you, for the sake of diversity, we have discussed about various kinds of linguistic human rights movements from the ecological perspective, from various other perspectives. So, ecological perspective talks about the very fundamental thing that diversity is good. Diversity is important, there are not only in terms of flora and fauna, but also in terms of languages, cultures, simply because it is a storehouse of information, storehouse of knowledge. So, you need to have different kinds of the variety should be there, the diversity should be there, because one language may not be, because many there are of course a group of people who believe that this whole thing about understanding languages and maintaining languages, that is not really important. One language would have been good, communication would be easy. So, they miss the whole point that many languages have different ways of looking at the world, and they have encoded centuries long information, their understanding, their knowledge system and so on. So, Russian, one very famous quote I would like to discuss here. So, Russian writer, he sums it up this way: each language constitutes a certain model of the universe, a semiotic system of understanding the world, and if we have 4,000 different ways to describe the world, this makes us rich. We should be concerned about preserving languages just as we are about preserving ecology. Nobody could have said this better. So, the more number of ways you can understand the world, the better it is for us, the richer we are. And then of course, language for its own sake. So, I rather than explaining it, I will just quote some different quotes from different countries as to how they look at it. So, Slovakia, with each newly learned language you acquire a new soul. These are from David Crystal's book. So, I have quoted Crystal extensively. In France, a man who knows 2 languages is worth 2 men. And then Emerson takes up this theme: as many languages as he has, as many friends, as many arts and trades, so many times is he a man. So, basically all of these sayings from different countries, what they are primarily pointing to is that each language brings a world of its own. So, if you know more than one language, you inhabit different worlds at the same time. So, you become different people, different person, different kinds of art, culture, trade, everything. So, that is how it makes you rich. So, that is another reason, that is what you lose. So, this is what language means, and this is what it will we will lose if we lose a language. So, basically in some Crystal puts it this way: humanity gains so much from each fresh expression of itself in a language. Then he goes on to give some very interesting examples. Languages encode information in different ways. So, in English, for example, you have the English pronoun system, which is very first, second, third person, and they have singular versus plural. So, you have a simplistic, from this perspective it is simplistic sort of a system. So, now, if we look at the world's languages, you will be fascinated as to how much what it tells us about the different possibilities of encoding information. So, many indigenous languages were previously thought to be primitive. They are not as rich as the powerful languages of the Western world. That was how it was understood. So, Crystal gives a couple of examples. One is Tok Pisin. We have talked about Tok Pisin in terms of Pidgin, when we talked about how Pidgins and Creoles were formed. So, Tok Pisin is a Papua New Guinean Creole. Now, it has the 6 terms as follows. So, they have this inclusive you and me, exclusive we but not you, them, she or it. So, but this system can also be expanded to produce so many different forms. So, it is possible that 2 of us, but not you, 3 of us, but not you. So, the addressee is excluded, 3 of us including you, and then the 2 of you, the 3 of them, the 4 of us, and all of that. This is difficult to understand from an English speaking perspective, because for this language there is a distinct way of expressing this. So, there are 2 of us and the third person to whom I am talking. When we say we are excluding you. In English it is not clear. When you say we, does it include the addressee, does it not include the addressee, so on and so forth. So, Tok Pisin has all of these. Now, interestingly, Tok Pisin is an English based Creole. Today it is Creole, started as a pidgin. So, but even then it has been able to create. So, this particular aspect of Tok Pisin comes from the native indigenous languages, where probably they have this kind of a complex way of complex pronominal understanding. So, that has been embedded in the English based pidgin. Another example that he gives is another language from Brazil and Colombia, where we have this evidential. So, in English you have, it is not grammaticalized. When you give a statement, I have seen, let us say there was a fair, village fair last week near my town. Now, when I say this, there is no way in terms of grammaticality, there is no information about whether I have seen the fair happening, I heard it from somebody else, or was it completely I was just making it up, or whatever. Some languages do make it it is grammaticalized, that information is grammaticalized. One such language is this, where the complexity, the evidentials are of there is a 5-way differentiation between in the evidentials. So, visual, I saw him play soccer. So, I saw him, I was the person who witnessed it happening. Non-visual, I heard the game and him, but I did not see it or him. So, he played soccer, but I have not seen. I heard, but I have not seen. Apparent, I have seen evidence that he played soccer, such as his clothes in the changing room, but I did not see him play. So, all of these sentences are talking about somebody playing soccer, but the information about whether the person who is speaking saw him, heard about it, had an indirect understanding of the event, or a second hand information, all of that is encoded in the grammaticality of the sentence. So, all of them have a different structure. So, second hand information, I obtained the information that he played soccer from somebody else, and the fifth possible counterpart is, it is reasonable to assume that he played soccer. So, in the sentence itself, grammatically you encode that information. So, this is what we lose if we lose a language like this, for example. You until and unless you come across a language with such complexity, we will not know that this is also a possible way of looking at the world. So, for the sheer complexity of understanding the world, looking at the world, the entire knowledge system will all be lost once a language is dead. So, that is why language death has very serious consequences. Now, automatic second step will be, okay, fine, this is important to revitalize, language death is serious matter. So, we probably need to revitalize. So, we have talked about revitalization also in the last lecture in very brief. So, now we will look at a little bit in detail. So, how do we define language revitalization? Hinton describes like this: language revitalization refers to the development of programs that result in re-establishing a language which has ceased being the language of communication in the speech community and bringing it back to full use in all walks of life. So, the language is no more used in the community as a medium of communication, it is not used for education, it is not used for any purposes. So, the idea is creating a program through which you can bring it back to life. That is a simplistic definition. For example, Hebrew is a success story in this domain. So, Hebrew was almost not used in the daily life, and however, through strong revitalization processes, Hebrew has been various methods, various measures were taken. I think we have discussed this in the previous lecture as well. So, the aims of revitalization generally is to maintain or restore a language to such a state that it is spoken by a reasonable number of people, reasonably fluently and in a reasonably intact form, because you cannot revitalize a language in its full glory to be used by the entire community all the time at the same time, it does not happen. But at least to some reasonable extent, if we are able to bring it back in use, then we can consider it revitalized. So, there are many steps that have been proposed for revitalization by Hinton. So, Hinton actually modified Fishman's 8 steps to reversing language shift. So, step 1, he talks about language assessment and planning. So, finding out the linguistic situation of the community, and then the number of speakers, their age, availability of resources, attitude of the people, etc., etc., and then accordingly set realistic goals for revitalizing the same. So, depending on the stage, you have to change your method. Step 2 is, if the language has no speakers, then use whatever available materials to reconstruct the language and develop language pedagogy. This is a more severe case of language loss. Step 3, if the language has only elderly speakers, then of course, document the elderly speakers language. Now, step 4 is develop a second language learning program for adults. Step 5 is redevelop or enhance cultural practices, encourage the use of endangered language at home and in public by first and second language speakers. Step 6 would be develop intensive second language program for children. Similarly, there are other steps like step 7, 8 and 9 also talk about how to go for revitalization. So, step 7, use the language at home as the primary language of communication, so that children will acquire it as their L1. Step 8, expand the use of the indigenous language into broader local domains. So, start from home and then go on to the broader local domain, and eventually if possible take it even in a much broader level. So, expand the language domains outside the local community and into the broader population. So, these are various methods that have been proposed to revitalize language. So, if it is gone, then whatever material is available, document it. If the only speakers are elderly speakers, then record them, and so on and so forth. And if there is a little bit of language that is still being used, then do these various steps. So, we will see some case studies now. We will start with India, some of the Indian languages, and then we will also have some other examples. So, in case of India, among the most well known research in terms of language endangerment and revitalization effort, we can put it to like in the broader domain of language death and revitalization. One of the most important work that has been carried out in the last couple of decades is the work on Great Andamanese language. Now, this language is the name comes from the area where the group resides, which is called the Great Andaman Islands. So, this language is spoken by only very few surviving pre-Neolithic tribe that originally migrated from Africa. So, this is a tribal group. Today it is called the Great Andamanese group, but at one point it was a mixture of a number of groups. So, 10 different communities were part of that broader group, and their ancestry has been traced all the way back to the pre-Neolithic tribe that migrated from Africa. So, Great Andamanese is a generic term representing 10 different languages once spoken by 10 tribes in north, south and middle of Great Andaman Islands. So, that is how the name of the group is also the Great Andamanese language. So, this language was a moribund language with very few speakers were actually alive. So, around 2004, the entire tribe consisted of 50 odd people, out of which only 8 or 9 people spoke the language. So, that is how when the documentation effort started 2002-3 around that time. So, very few people, severely moribund language, and this is when documentation effort started. As of 2022, the language had only 4 semi speakers left. So, the elderly of the group died and some of them passed away very recently as well. So, by 2022 only 4, that too semi speakers, no proper full time Andamani speakers are left. So, more than 2 decades of research on the language has ensured that the surviving songs, narrations and other treasures are recorded. So, this entire effort by Professor Anvita Abbi from JNU and her group has documented the language, and whatever is possible to document have been almost entirely have been documented. So, the resultant output is the grammar, there is a dictionary and many other documented words work on the language. So, these are the references that I have added. This has been a very interesting line of work, lots of interesting findings. I have added a few because we have other languages to describe as well. So, the present Get Andamanese, that is how it has been called, PGA, has many unique features which is unique to only this language. We do not find them in many other Indian languages. One of them is the heavy use of proclitics, where free personal pronouns can exist in reduced form as a proclitic. So, the personal pronoun when they are free, they take the form of a proclitic, which can also combine with other clitics like body parts, proclitic and form a clitic sequencing. This is something very unique in this language, and this language has a rather distinct and unique genitive construction of alienable and inalienable possessions as well. And another important finding of this group is that the pervasive body division, which body division markers that occur with nouns, modifiers and verbs, both stative and action verbs. So, these are some of the most important findings, and this that tells us that this is a very distinct kind of a language, probably belonging to a different language family. If you are interested, you can always look up Professor Abbi's latest work where she has talked about these things. So, now we can move on to other language, for example, Thai Ahom. So, this is a study from, I am quoting Moray's study in 2014 on Thai Ahom. So, Ahom is a Thai Kadai language with no native speakers. It is located in Sivsagar, Jorhat and Dibrugarh districts of Assam in northeast India. It is considered a dead language, but survives in 3 ways. Very interesting study. Vast collections of manuscripts used as a ritual language and undergoing revitalization. Actually, many researchers are working on this right now. So, the reasons for language death of this particular language was non-Thai population in the Thai Ahom kingdom, then intermarriage, contact with the Indian culture. The Thai Ahom cultures are slightly different, but they assimilated into the Indian culture. So, eventually the Thai cultural practices were not anymore practiced. So, conversion to Hinduism, costly nature of the traditional Ahom rituals. These are some of the pointers that Moray talks about as to why the language died. Now, revitalization efforts have been around for some time now, since early 20th century. So, publication of Ahom dictionaries and language textbooks, that is called Ahom primers, creation of first Ahom true type font led to increase in publication, then translation of texts into Ahom, then memorandum passed to recognize Thai Ahom identity. Then many various methods have been utilized in order to bring it back, to revitalize. So, currently revitalization of Thai Ahom is going on thanks to efforts of Moray and others. So, formation of East Thai literary organization, introduction of teaching the language as a subject in primary schools. But then the thing is, these kind of efforts are there in its own place, primarily carried out by the researchers and the community members, but it takes a little bit of time before it actually becomes a language for broader social use, which is still not the case with Thai Ahom, because not much of use in the regular day to day life has still started. But of course, the efforts are going on, and hopefully it will get better in time. Another interesting study from India is that of Gondi language revitalization. Now, Gondi is a Dravidian language belonging to the Gond tribe spoken in Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Chhattisgarh, many parts in the central Indian region, Telangana, Odisha. So, parts of all of these states in the central part of India. This language is listed as a vulnerable language. Remember our list of languages, list of types of endangerment. So, vulnerable is one such. So, UNESCO, as per UNESCO regulations, this language is considered a vulnerable language. Now, the reason for why the language was lost, the reasons were influence of other dominant languages, because it is most of the time like this. So, the smaller groups, the minority speakers eventually shift because of the prestige factor. In this case, they shifted to Hindi or Chhattisgarhi because those were the dominant languages, more powerful, more prestigious, and so on. Emergence of hybrid varieties, a mixed form of which is called Dehati language, blending Hindi and Chhattisgarhi. Adoption of Hindi as a major means of communication by the people themselves. Young generation increasingly becoming Hindi monolinguals with formal education, accelerating the shift. So, over a period of time, this is a classic case of language shift through, language is not yet dead, language this is vulnerable. So, vulnerability through shift. So, when another more powerful language, socially and economically more powerful language takes its place, so the population themselves they shift their loyalty from their L1 to L2. This is what has happened in this case. In case of Tai Ahom, of course, this was a migration and cross cultural contact. Over a period of time, they lost their language. So, revitalization processes, the goal, the researcher talks about the goal to develop a standardized Gondi language for official use to reduce communication gap, because this is spoken across different, in modern day across different political boundaries of different states. So, as a result there are different varieties. So, the idea is to create a standardized variety of the language. Now, Gondi has mutually unintelligible dialects and hybrid varieties, and each state promotes Gondi independently, as a result of which a standardized or one Gondi language might be difficult in at least in for some time. And then regional initiatives also, that in Telugu speaking regions, for example, considerable work is being done to promote Gondi, and also there is a lot of effort going on now for creating a Gondi dictionary. So, this is where we complete this lecture. There are some examples, of course, not too many, but David Crystal's book is a good resource book, and also some work is many works are going on in India as well. The references are there for you to look up. So, this is where we will complete this part of the course. Thank you.